It wasn't at all like the stories people tell in church on the morning after the rising. There were no bright lights or thunder in the sky. It was very quiet. They were too scared to go outside, so they hid in a small stone room on the edge of Jerusalem. Death had won before. They were not sure what to think. Then, out of the blue, Jesus stood back among them, this time living, quiet, and different. The Ethiopian Bible says that he didn't come back to do more wonders or show how powerful he was. He came to teach. His lessons were not for large groups, but for people who were ready to listen. He talked to them about what he called the mysteries of heaven for 40 days. His words before the cross were different from these. They were different. They were deeper and sharper, like fire making truth smoother. The writings describe a scene that is almost too real to be real. As the night went on, Jesus sat with his friends. His voice was quiet, and he was always there. There was no sound or a flash of light. All that could be heard was the rhythm of breathing and the flickering light of the oil lamps on the walls. For them, what he told them those nights would change everything: life, death, and even what it meant to follow him. He talked about a country that wasn't built by kings or protected by swords in the Ethiopian text. They were told not to compare God's job to what people can do. He told them, "Don't build my kingdom with thrones. Build it with fire, the fire that burns inside you, not through conquest, but through kindness." It was a lesson about being strong. The fire he talked about wasn't a weapon. Being aware was like a light that fear and pain could not put out. He then told them something that would never be taught in a temple or kingdom. The house of God is not made of stone, he said, but of minds that are alive. It was the exact opposite of what everyone else thought. It had turned into walls and customs, but he talked about something that was alive and couldn't be killed by time or remade by politics. Faith was something that people lived and breathed. It was a fact that didn't need permission to exist. The Ethiopian manuscripts show Jesus less as a healer and more as a guide who helps people change. He didn't use signs to prove himself. He taught those who followed him to see the divine in themselves. Each word woke them up, but did not give them anything to reward them. Here, guilt and the idea that they could only be saved after death were things he wanted them to let go of. This version says that the rising wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who learned to live with their eyes open. It must have been hard for the students to get it. Their thoughts were still on his death, and they still longed for a win that they could see and feel. But he kept coming back to the same idea. Love, not survival, is what keeps life going. The text from Ethiopia says that he told them, "The hidden light will be seen again." They used those words as a guide for the rest of their lives. He wasn't just talking about heaven, he was telling them that the truth would come back, even if it had been hidden by fear or time. These parts don't sound like anything else in the Gospels that most people know. There are no feasts or nets full of fish by the water. There is only a quiet teacher talking about eternal things. The lamplight on his face lights up the room with trust again. Each line feels like a key that opens a bigger door than belief. It opens the door to understanding. The lesson is deep enough to shake people's faith, but it's also easy enough for anyone to understand. He said that salvation wasn't a reward for being good. It was a wake-up call that the holy light had never left. For those who followed him, the resurrection wasn't just a moment in time. It was a way of being that started when someone turned toward the truth. They didn't learn how to build churches for 40 days. Instead, they learned how to be brave. They learned that having faith wasn't a way to get away from the world, but a way to change it from the inside out. And the Ethiopian manuscripts say that when he was done teaching, he left them in silence. This wasn't because he had nothing else to say, but because they had to live out the rest of the lesson. The lamps were not very bright. The teacher was no longer there, but they didn't feel alone this time. They had something new with them, something living. People who kept these words secret thought the world wasn't ready for them yet. After writing them down, they put them in paper, sealed it, and hid it in a monastery where only silence could protect it. However, quiet never lasts a long time. What those secret pages show about his next words will make us question everything we thought we knew about faith, the hidden manuscripts, and their keepers. Some monasteries in Ethiopia's highlands look like they haven't changed in a long time. They are far from the noise of towns. These old sanctuaries are tucked into cliffs, hidden by fog and watched over by silence. They hold something that most people today have forgotten: scrolls written in Ge'ez, Ethiopia's holy language. Each one was made by hand, with ink being used to carve the letters into thin pieces of goatskin parchment. Without locks or troops, they've been kept out of the sun and away from strangers for more than 1,000 years. The air inside these temples smells like smoke and candle wax. The drawings on the walls have been darkened by oil lamps for hundreds of years, and somewhere inside those walls, monks have spent their whole lives writing down words they thought God spoke. For them, each line of ink was holy. Every page wasn't just a record, it held a promise. They thought they were protecting the truth, not history. The Book of the Covenant and the Didascalia Apostolorum are two books that most people have never seen before. Both are part of Ethiopia's larger canon, which has 81 books, which is a lot more than the 66 books that make up Western Bibles. They have lessons that are said to have come from the risen Jesus. These are messages that he spoke after he rose from the dead and never appeared in the Gospels that most people know. The monks kept these books safe for generations, treating them like valuable jewels that should not be shown. They only read from them during holy services, and it was always in Ge'ez, which not many people outside of the church could understand. No one from outside the group was allowed to copy or translate them. To show them to the world would be to risk changing them. The monks thought that people should not know the truth until they were ready to accept it. One page at a time, they kept copying by the dim light of a flame that never went out. Scholars from today were shocked by what they found when they finally got permission to study the texts. The scrolls were older than most collections in the West, and the words on them had not been changed or edited in hundreds of years. Small but clear, the letters were written by hands that were careful and never rushed. Some of the words on the pages had never been read by anyone outside of Ethiopia. Days and hours are shadows. Truth stands outside their count. A line in one section seemed to sound like it came from the voice of the resurrected Christ. It was a sentence that was calm, strange, and timeless, unlike anything else in the Bible today. It talked about infinity as something that doesn't wait for calendars or clocks, as if to say that God lives past every moment we can measure. There were no miracles or punishments in these stories. The lessons were meant to change the people who heard by teaching them about awareness, compassion, and awakening. With each new finding, more questions came up. Why weren't these words part of the Western canon? Who chose which parts of his word would stay and which would go away? The Ethiopian texts didn't try to write the gospel all over again. They just finished it. They filled in the gap between resurrection as an event and resurrection as a way of being. Each scroll told the same silent story. It was about monks who didn't think kings or assemblies could have divine truth. There was a lot of love in the writing, even lines between the letters, like the person who did it knew they were saving something for a future that might not exist yet. When researchers and film teams started going to places like Debre Damo and Lalibela, they caught scenes that made them feel like they were in a different time. Monks who were barefoot and patient opened papers that had been stored outside for hundreds of years. Like memory itself, dust rose from the paper. The old ink began to breathe again in the dim light. Without being changed by translation or power, the voice of the teacher who had risen from the dead whispered across time on those pages. These were not just lost books. They were witnesses who were still alive. They showed that Ethiopia had a line of believers that went from the first followers of Christ to the present day without any changes made by the Romans or people in the West. And inside their lines was a form of Christianity that seemed cleaner, calmer, and more connected to its roots. What was found in those scrolls is amazing, but what they say about him, the lessons he left behind for everyone to finally listen to, is even more amazing, and those secret words start to change what it means to be raised from the dead for good. The message of the risen Christ. The Ethiopian manuscripts speak of a teacher who has been changed by death. They talk about a Jesus who is no longer limited by time, fear, or the need to show that he is God. His words are cool, clear, and to the point. They are not full of metaphors or arguments. Being truly alive is shown in each line, which reads like a light held out in the dark. His first lesson in these writings is about light. The light within you is the same that raised me. He tells those who follow him, keep it safe, and darkness won't be able to get there. It's not a call to worship, but to pay attention. For this type of resurrection, a body doesn't come back to life. Instead, a spirit wakes up to what was always there. He's not talking about an outside light. The light he talks about is inside everyone covered by fear and habit. He tells them that those who keep their inner light safe will rise before their bodies ever fall. He thought that understanding that you were never separate from life was the greatest miracle. Then he talks about time, but not in the way most people would think of it. He says, time does not belong to people. Eternity does. It's clear what it means. Our clocks and calendars are just tricks when compared to the holy life that never ends. This idea breaks down fear for those who listen. If every breath is already surrounded by forever, then death has no power over us. He tells those who follow him to break free from the limits that hold the mind hostage and see life not as a straight line, but as an endless circle. This lesson is not philosophy in the Ethiopian record. It is freedom. The next thing he warns us about is religion. Watch out for priests in white robes who destroy widows' homes. It's a strong message against lying that feels just as important now as it did back then. He knew it was dangerous for faith to turn into a business, a way to make money and boss people around in his name. His words break through that illusion and show the difference between acting and telling the truth. If kindness is gone, the white robes and somber ceremonies don't mean anything. He says that what you do when no one is looking is what really shows your faith. His tone changes again when he talks about the kingdom. He is less likely to warn and more likely to invite. Honor is what builds the kingdom that wasn't made by hands. Even though these are easy words, they change everything that religion has become. He doesn't believe in stone shrines, power crowns, or the idea of dominance that looks like holiness. Instead, he wants a kingdom that people feel inside their hearts. For every moment of mercy and kindness, a building block of heaven is made. His kingdom is already here in everyone who learns to love without expecting anything in return. You will see me where there is no death and no darkness follows. This seems to be the most important part of the whole message. His friends thought he would show up again somewhere in the clouds, but he pointed inside them instead. He taught them that the best place to find him was in the stillness of their own spirit, not in the sky or in churches. To see him meant to see the truth as it really is, which is endless, unbreakable, and living inside. His return didn't prove that he was divine, it proved that he was connected. When put together, these sayings don't make a faith, they make a change. They are not rules to follow, they are just warnings. Every phrase pulls the viewer in, away from routine and toward understanding. The Ethiopian texts show that this Jesus is not starting a school. He's waking up an awareness. He is saying that forgiveness doesn't start after death. It starts when someone chooses love over fear, truth over lies, and living over surviving. Many years ago, this view of faith made experts uncomfortable. It blurs the line between religion and mysticism, implying that anyone who is ready to wake up can experience divine union and not just holy people or priests. It doesn't sound like the organized faith that empires established. Instead, it sounds like the first whispers of a movement that wants to free people, not rule them. That's what makes these works both lovely and dangerous. Christianity might have been different if these words had made it into the Western canon. Instead of being afraid of hell, Christians could have learned to see that heaven was already there. Instead of making monuments, they could have built kindness. They might not have had to wait for the afterlife if they had known that every heartbeat was a connection to endless life. Why? They were removed. The world of the Romans was changing by the 400s. Once upon a time, the kingdom hurt Christians, and now it wanted to control their faith. After many years of fighting, the councils of Nicaea and Laodicea brought together bishops from all over the kingdom to decide what was scripture and what wasn't. It wasn't just about faith, it was about coming together. There had to be one Bible for each kingdom. The canon that came out of those talks was narrower. It favored clarity over mystery and obedience over exploration. Doctrines were turned into rules, and texts that talked about personal revelation or hidden information were quietly left out. People said that the words that told people to find God within themselves were dangerous. People who copied or read these kinds of works were at risk of being called heretics. The empire couldn't send the message that every person was equal in the eyes of God, that divine truth didn't need permission, and that heaven was a state of mind rather than a reward for loyalty. Ethiopia was too far away for Rome to reach, so it never joined those councils. Its church grew on its own, protected by mountains and faith. Without the weight of royal politics, its canon stayed broad, with books like the Didascalia Apostolorum and the Book of the Covenant in it. While people in the West polished marble shrines, people in Ethiopia kept parchment scrolls safe. The monks of Lalibela and Debre Damo quietly kept what Rome tried to erase safe. The cuts were driven by three reasons. First, there was control. A faith of free minds was a threat to the order of the Memorizers. Second, mysticism, texts that talked about visions, angels, and the inner fire of the soul unnerved intellectuals who liked reason over revelation. Third, fear. If people could talk to God directly, why do they need preachers and power? A message of unity could not stand up to a faith that is based on hierarchy. The empire made temples out of marble, but Ethiopia made memory out of paper. As Rome burned disagreeing papers to the ground, Ethiopian monks copied them over and over because they thought the truth could only live in silence. It was called blasphemy in the West. That's what people in the East called it. What was supposed to go away ended up hiding in the mountains. And when those papers were opened by translators 1,500 years later, the warnings inside sounded less like old prophecy and more like a mirror held up to the present, the prophecy and the age of forgotten faith. In the Ethiopian writings, the voice of the risen Christ changes from one of comfort to one of warning. He thinks about the time after the disciples' deaths and says that his teaching will live on in name only, not in spirit. The texts say, "There will come a time when my name will be yelled from every market and throne, but no one will hear my voice." It is a scary prophecy that has been told for hundreds of years. He saw a time when faith would be used for show. He said, "They will build temples to honor me, but the temple of the heart will fall apart." It sounds a lot like our time. Faith turned into a brand, prayer shaped for cameras, and power wrapped in the Bible. The Ethiopian scribes didn't see these sayings as metaphors. They saw them as predictions. They saw them as warnings that people would trade being present for looking good and loyalty for show. In this vision, Jesus wasn't saying that religion was wrong. He was sad that it was becoming more focused on power and money. His prophecy talked about a time when his name would be in the news and in preaching, but his spirit would not be there. There would be churches as high as mountains, but the inner sanctuary, the place of honesty and surrender, would be in ashes. The cure is in the Didascalia, humility, fasting, and service. It tells people who follow it to feed the hungry, care for women, and be quiet instead of loud. The monks who kept these words didn't see them as old advice. They saw them as survival tips for a world full of noise and distraction. For them, holiness wasn't about show. It was about holding back. But the promise doesn't end with hopelessness. He says in another text that the truth will come back, but not from powerful places. When the truth comes back, it will come from the edges, from deserts, mountains, and the mouths of people who have been forgotten. Those lines have become lifelines for small religion groups, seekers who get together in people's homes or online, and people who leave empty institutions to find something real again. According to Ethiopian custom, resurrection never ended. It happens again whenever truth, which has been buried by noise and greed, comes to the surface through people who choose love over image.